Okay, recording now. Welcome, Max Grinnell.
Hi, Jennifer. So glad to be here with everyone. And welcome everyone who is viewing this video. I am Max Grinnell. I teach urban studies, and I am the author of 3 different books about Chicago. And one of the subjects I teach is urban design. And I've always had a long-standing interest in Chicago's public art. One of the projects I've always done with my students is to ask them to look at 2 to 3 pieces of public art in the city and see how they might change them, how they might transform them, and also invite them to think about new pieces of public art throughout the city. And obviously this is something that we're very much aware of with all the conversations going on about public art in Chicago and beyond, places like New York, Charlottesville, Seattle, Los Angeles, and reevaluating particularly older pieces of work and thinking about how they fit into cities today, the images they present. So I picked out 6 moments, and one of the things I think was interesting as I looked around through my own research and continue to do work for this project is there really could have been a lot more pieces included. I picked out a couple that are recent, very au courant in our own time, and a couple, what we might say, classics, ones that are frequently discussed when thinking about the history of public art and art more generally. I will say that some of these pieces are not necessarily, strictly speaking, public art. They were created under private auspices, but by virtue of the controversy around these pieces, they have become public. So thank you all for joining me, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I always like to have people think about questions and really invitations to conversation. Obviously, we're recording this for the Chicago Public Library's YouTube channel, but things you might think about as you go through your own time in your own city and your experience of public art, whether it's murals, paintings, sculptures, short-term installations, and other works. First question I always like to ask everyone is, who are cities for? As we think about conversations about equity, social justice, inclusion amidst rising socioeconomic inequality, particularly in major American cities, this is a question that I feel that should be at the forefront, not just in questions about arts and culture, but about public policy and thinking about the way forward through the 21st century. Second question, as we drill down and as part of this conversation, is who is public art for? You know, is it for the tourist, right? You might think of the appeal of pieces like Anish Kapoor's Cloudgate or The Bean. Should it be to reflect the community values as they are found in the contemporary city? Third question, who should decide what type of public art we have? Increasingly, there are conversations about gatekeepers, both in society at large, and as we drill down to think about pieces and the reevaluation of historical pieces of art, such as the statues of Christopher Columbus around the city of Chicago, and we'll talk about that, among other things. You know, should we have committees? Should it be people voting online? Should we enlist the help of Chicago public school children? These are some of the questions that are currently going on in thinking about the decision-making process. And of course, historically, pieces of public art have generally been founded, or the money has been given by very wealthy individuals, which probably does not surprise anyone who's showing up to this talk. Should any public art be forever? What are there, can we think about things that are timeless or universal? One of the conversations that come up recently as I've made my way through the world of public art and the design and review process is that more and more we have conversations about kind of a continual process of improvement and enhancement that reflects kind of it's almost a hyperkinetic lifestyle that many people have enabled by smartphones, etc. And even the phrase Instagrammable backgrounds. This is another part of the kind of conversation how do you keep people's attention? And one of the ways you keep people's attention is by doing different things with public art. I will mention the Chicago Statue Stories program right now, which has paired different well-known Chicago or Chicago-based celebrities with different pieces of art around the city. And you can go through with your smartphone and listen to little narrative statements about those pieces of art. So those are the 4 questions, and we're going to go ahead and get started and dive into our pieces of art. The formal title of this piece is Hope and Renewal. And I would ask the audience, what do you see? What does this look like? Of course, we can't talk back because we're on YouTube. But this is done by a piece by the artist Josh Garber. Some of you may recognize this if you are Brown Line riders or Ravenswood residents, Lincoln Square residents, Albany Park residents. Is Brown Line, last up on the Brown Line at the Kimball Station. And of course, the Chicago Transit Authority has a very aggressive and I think diverse public art program. Some of those monies come from the Federal Transit Authority and other sources. So as different stations have been renovated over the years, in the last 2 decades, particularly on the Green Lines, the Brown Lines, and other L lines, they have had new pieces installed, and older pieces have been refurbished or replaced. So the idea for Josh's piece was that he would inspire the community and give people a place to sit. Seems pretty straightforward. He meant for the forms to resemble a lotus flower, kind of this kind of peaceful place for gathering. However, some people thought it was something else. When they were looking through the design review project in 2005, there were some community residents who complained to the then alderman, Richard Mell, and said that they looked phallic in nature. And this is something we will talk about a little bit during this talk, is what does one think about public art when it resembles portions of the human anatomy? Now, this was funded as part of the Arts and Transit program. And this is done, as I said, over a decade ago. And of course, artists like Josh Garber had to submit their qualifications, their resume, slides of completed work, so on and so forth. So interesting kind of Josh's response to this, and I'll kind of share an excerpt from a Tribune article, as he said, in Cambodia, the idea of planting a flower signifies hope and renewal, and the flower is a symbol of growth and opportunity. So I thought in that area, here he's referring to Albany Park, there are a lot of immigrants and a lot of refugees, that it would be appropriate to design something that gives some sense of optimism, of growth or hope, to kind of uplift the community without being too literal. You see here's a close-up of the piece. In all my time walking by, I've only seen a couple people sit on the sculpture. So despite the fact that people and one person even said that they were pornographic in nature, this is something that fortunately they did not choose to censor the piece or have it resubmitted for reevaluation. And of course, the piece is still there, but it did become a little bit of a tempest as people, some community residents thought that it was phallic in nature. And if you ever take a trip on the Brown Line, probably some of you had, I'd say it's definitely worth taking a look. It's quite an interesting piece. All right, now we're going to go back in time. Oh, let me take a moment and say, this is kind of a menagerie. It's a non-chronological menagerie. I'll be taking you backward and forward and backward in time. So here we have a moment from the early 2000s, and now we will return to those fateful summer, fall, and winter days of 1968. This is a study for a monument to Richard J. Daley, the mayor of Chicago from 1955 to 1976. And it is done by an artist who is closely associated with the city of Chicago, Claes Oldenburg. Some of you who are listening may remember Claes Oldenburg or seen Claes Oldenburg's work in front of the Social Service Administration building on West Madison called Bat Column. And that's certainly one of his most well-known pieces. And he came to the city and found a new way of being in the world. And he was also quite traumatized by the events around the Democratic National Convention in August of 1968. And he was also interested in creating a series of exhibitions with other artists in Chicago to look back at those events, to do a reevaluation of that time in Chicago's history. So working together, working together with the folks at the Fagan Gallery, he and a team of 30 other artists created the Richard J. Daley protest show. It was meant to take a look back at the events of the summer of 1968. So, you know, I don't want to say it was a kind of a hot take, but it was an immediate visceral reaction to those events. And of course, Claes Oldenburg himself had been tossed to the ground during part of the Democratic National Convention protests in and around the city, throughout the Loop, Grant Park, Lincoln Park, etc. So working with the Fagan Gallery, this Richard J. Daley protest show, and originally had been a show for Claes Oldenburg himself, went on to go start in the fall and winter of 1968 for 3 months. And the idea was to start conversation about this. So this is Claes Oldenburg's entry, which is a piece designed to look at a monument to I don't know if Richard J. Daley is smiling or grimacing there. And it was full of other submissions by artists responding to these contemporary events. And here you have another submission. This is by the artist Barnett Newman, and he called it Lace Curtain for Mayor Daley. That's made out of Contretemps steel, galvanized barbed wire, and enamel paint. And the cynical title was a deliberate jab at Daley's Irish heritage and a rebuke for the mayor's anti-Semitic heckling of Senator Abraham Ribicoff as he spoke at the convention. Lace curtain Irish, probably a familiar phrase to some of you, was essentially used to denigrate someone trying to mask a modest background with superficial signs of upward mobility. Certainly a dramatic piece. And of course, as you might imagine, Richard J. Daley did not attend this exhibition, but it was certainly a flashpoint among Chicago's art scene, or one segment of Chicago's art scene, as people began to respond to the events of summer 1968. Here's another piece from there. You have Mayor Daley again. My Pal Trigger is kind of like a pop art reinvention of some of those dominant symbols. So we are going to continue to move backward in time, 50 plus years, to what on the surface of it may seem like a fairly straightforward piece. This is called The Sower, and it's by the artist Albany Park, who had come to Chicago to head the School of the Art Institute sculpture department. He had always been interested in kind of depictions of the human form, probably not a surprise given the time period, late 19th, early 20th century, in which he started his work. The Sower, which is the image we're looking at now, is a classically inspired figure in the tradition of monumental male nudes. Kind of think about someone like Michelangelo's David with a little bit more of a kind of a farm boy or farm man appeal. The piece was finished in 1916, and it went up outside the museum's main entrance right there on Michigan Avenue. Probably some of you sat on those steps or waited in line while putting your mask on to enter the Art Institute. It was also a form of advertisement. There was a new exhibition of American sculpture going on in 1916. There was also opening of a new gallery space, Gonzales Hall, which is the hall that, of course, spans what was then the Illinois Central Railway tracks, or we now know as Metro. So there's a little bit of background behind the reason for this piece. Now we will see the uh-oh moment, if you will. Once again, portions of the human anatomy come into play. One newspaper referred to it as the naked farmer sculpture. There were certainly not many Chicagoans who were used to seeing full frontal male nudity on Michigan Avenue. And it also caught the attention of the city's first censor of public morals, one Major MLC Funkhauser. This is a piece that appeared on the front page of the Chicago Tribune in the spring of 1916. Art Institute statue of sewer shocks women. Protests say figure makes Miss Morn seem prudish. Let art be, was the reply, and letters came in from everywhere to say, listen, we got to get this out of here. Some folks spoke in defense of it. And of course, interestingly enough, there was a journal article around this time that said a woman had stopped in front of the Art Institute, took one look at this sculpture, and then rushed to a telephone demanding that it be removed. Another piece said that the nude statue on the Art Institute steps must go. And here you can see another reference to Major Funkhauser, whose official title was Second Deputy Superintendent of Police, but also the Arbiter of Morals. So at the end of all of this, the statue was in fact removed. It was locked in a crate for decades and decades. And in a most kind of fortuitous series of turnabouts, it made its way to the Chicago Botanic Garden in Glencoe, Illinois. And it was finally put on display over 15 years ago. So here you have this, another one of these kind of controversies, one of these contretemps about a nude statue. Now we probably wouldn't give it a second look, but in 1916, it was something that caught the eye of many, and the protesters, the people who complained, won out, and it found its way into a crate for decades. Unfortunately, it has been restored. You can go see it, as I mentioned, at the Botanic Garden. One other proposal that I found as doing research for this piece was, could you put a sailor's outfit on the sewer, thereby covering him up? A little bit of creative artistic license there. Well, we're at one of my favorite moments, certainly in American history. Years before the establishment of National Endowment for the Humanities, other large marquee arts funding projects from the federal and state government, we had the Works Progress Administration, which puts artists, painters, sculptors, writers back to work, creating guidebooks, creating works of public art for schools, libraries, post offices. And I bet some of you are thinking right now, why, yes, I have some of those in my public buildings, maybe in my neighborhood, in Lincoln Park, Grand Crossing, Hyde Park, and perhaps away from Chicago as well. And this is one of those controversies that really took over. And there's been a lot of work going on about the WPA murals in and around the city of Chicago and places like Oak Park. And in some places, these murals in elementary schools and high schools around Chicago and other places were painted over for a variety of reasons. Some of them were painted over in the 1990s because they were culturally insensitive, among other things. But when this particular piece was taken out in 1941, people were gravely concerned. The title of the mural that we're going to be talking about is Women's Contribution to American Progress. And there's an image of that. And this was found, or was finished by the artist Edward Millman in 1940. And it was, and is, in the Lucy Flower High School in Garfield Park, right across the street from the Garfield Park Conservatory. the idea behind Millman's work was he wanted to pay tribute to Lucy Flower, who was a Chicago school reformer, and other influential women from American history. The piece originally included Jane Addams, Clara Barton, Susan B. Anthony, and Harriet Tubman, among others. It also depicted quite vividly and didn't pull any punches by looking at some of the struggles these women went through. But at the time, there were many members of the Chicago School Board who said that the images of slavery depicted were misery-laden and thus inappropriate for a school. Fortunately, I think for us in 1998, the organization called the Conservation Center was able to remove the paint that had been used to paint over the original mural, and it was restored. And really in the late 90s, you have a lot of work going on with at least a dozen murals throughout Chicago Public Schools being restored to their original grandeur, which I think is really wonderful. Well, you probably figured at some point we were going to talk about Christopher Columbus. Probably some of you have seen and heard about in recent months, especially kind of conversations that have taken place about monuments to people associated with the Civil War, particularly in the South, Southern Confederate generals and other people, and the removal of their statues. This movement has led many other cities, including Chicago, to think about pieces of statuary and other works that may be time to reevaluate for any number of reasons. And this is the Christopher Columbus statue or monument at Arrigo Park. And this is in the near West Side, Little Italy area. And of course, this statue, or maybe not of course, this statue was removed in July of 2020, along with statues of Columbus in Grant Park. Not without controversy. And this particular statue has a rather interesting bit of history, because even though it was put here in the 1970s or 1960s, this statue was not always here. It actually used to be at the Columbus Memorial Building, which is on the southeast corner of State and Washington. So interestingly enough, you might be thinking to yourself, well, what's at State and Washington right now? It is in fact what was until recently the two-story Old Navy building right there near Marshall Field. This, when the building was finished in 1893 by William Boynton, they wanted to commemorate Christopher Columbus's role as an explorer, as the great men of history, as it were, and they installed this rather elaborate sculpture. Now, when the building was torn down in 1959, the statue was put into storage for 7 years. And there it remained until a group of Italian Americans, including the businessman Victor Arrigo, wanted to take the statue and put it in, which to that point had been historically an Italian, partially Italian American neighborhood in the near West Side. So the statue itself has bounced around from place to place. And here is an article from the Chicago Tribune. It says, "Long journey home to end for Columbus. A long circuitous journey home is coming to a happy end for the city's once forlorn Christopher Columbus statue. Since losing its perch on the Columbus Memorial Building at State and Washington Streets to the wreckers 7 years ago, the statue has had its ups and downs." And the piece goes on to talk a little bit about its ups and downs. And it was actually, of all things, in the Department of Urban Renewal at 515 South Loomis Street. And there you can see Victor Arrigo is one of the men in this picture, and they are celebrating its return. Well, let me take you to July, this past Sunday, when the Chicago Tribune reported Italian Americans gather in Little Italy to demand Christopher Columbus statues put back. So this past Sunday, several hundred people gathered in Arrigo Park to call on Mayor Lightfoot to return the statue that was removed that we've been talking about, the statue from Grant Park, and another statue of Columbus, which was taken out of the South Chicago neighborhood. People said it was a little bit controversial at the time. This Columbus statue in Grant Park was taken down at night in the summer of 2020. And there have been a lot of calls since then, including one call by the president of the Joint Civic Committee of Italian Americans, one Ron Anesti, who said at the rally this past Sunday, "We are here to tell the mayor of the city of Chicago, we want the Columbus statues back." So they are not just asking for this statue back, but they're also asking for the return of the other two statues. And there are other speakers there too, including the president of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge number 7, and other people who spoke about bringing back the Columbus statue. And interestingly enough, there was also a counter protest by another group of activists who were hoping to have these statues stay off display. So this is a perfect time for us to segue into another conversation, which is about the Chicago Monuments Project Advisory Committee. And this is something that has come out of this cultural moment, this moment in our social political cultural history in Chicago, where they've set up a project advisory to evaluate a number of city-owned pieces of public art, predominantly some statues, some plaques, and other items that they would like reviewed. And you can see their mission statement here. And the hope is this broad coalition will engage with a wide range of communities and worldviews to ask questions and bring the perspectives required to do this work on behalf of all Chicago's people. Read a little bit about their guiding principles. And again, this is less than a year old at this point. History, public engagement, and new work. And they issued a number of months ago a list of over 40 items or 40 pieces of public art that they would like reviewed, or they have selected for possible review. We'd say it took out of a collection, and here are some of the reasons which we've hinted at so far in this talk that warrant public discussion: promoting narratives of white supremacy, presenting inaccurate and or demeaning characterizations of American Indians, memorializing individuals with connections to racist acts, slavery, and genocide, presenting selective, oversimplified, one-sided views of history, not sufficiently including other stories, in particular those of women, people of color, and themes of labor, migration, and community building. And the last one, creating tension between people who see value in these artworks and those who do not. Just gonna talk briefly. As I said, there was an initial list issued forth by the committee, evaluating pieces like the Republic, which some of you may know is in Jackson Park, a bit of Columbian Exposition history, tablet dedicated to the explorers Joliet and Marquette, another tablet dedicated to Cavalier de la Salle, the Balboa Monument, which has come over as kind of a critique because of his fascism, Kinsey Mansion plaque, Indian boundary lines plaque. So there's kind of part of this conversation I think we're always having about public art, but it has been elevated, I think, because of broader kind of societal concerns, protests around the death of people like George Floyd, and kind of broader conversations about socioeconomic inequality, among other things. Well, our last story, I've saved the one that has always intrigued me the most. And it's hard because there are many that intrigue me, and there's a number that I did not include as part of this talk, was about the, I don't know if I want to say famous, but certainly infamous painting known as Mirth and Girth, which was created by a student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, David K. Nelson. So obviously the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, a private institution, but his work, which we will see in a minute, depicted the recently deceased mayor of Chicago, Mayor Harold Washington, It was a piece that went up in the spring of 1988, only a few months after Mayor Washington had passed away. And David Nelson, who was then a student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, created this painting. And many people were upset at his depiction of the late Mayor Harold Washington. And you can see this is one of the first articles in the Tribune about the piece that talks, and it said, one alderman described the painting as an insult to Harold Washington, an insult to the Black community, and an insult to all fair-minded people. And there you have it. That is David K. Nelson's painting, which appeared in a hallway in the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in the spring of 1988. It was called Mirth and Girth. And as you probably can tell, it depicts Mayor Harold Washington holding a pencil and clad in lingerie. The reaction was swift. This is a painting of a Chicago police officer and alder people. You see the former alderman Dorothy Tillman, Alan Streeter, and other folks removing the painting, and the painting was damaged in the process, which made a number of students and David K. Nelson kind of upset. They literally went in and removed the piece from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and there was quite an uproar from all quarters as a result. So interestingly enough, a couple years later, after the piece was removed, you can hear a little bit about the story. David Nelson, who was a student, accused the three alder people at the time of violating his civil rights. They literally took the piece out of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And then there was this hemming and hawing about who should pay for their legal fees. So this is kind of another kind of wrinkle that happened 2 years later over this piece. And finally, in 1994, the piece, or I suppose the litigation about this public art controversy was finally settled in September of 1994, when the suit was basically dropped. And of course, there were many people, including the Chicago Tribune's Clarence Page, who wrote a piece called The People's Republic of Chicago, claiming that the School of the Art Institute, excuse me, not the School of the Art Institute, claiming that the aldermen were way out of line, as were Chicago police officers, in helping them take away, essentially practice censorship. So it was a saga that lasted for 6 years, and one that I think is kind of worthy of re-examining as we think about some of these controversies and conversations about public art. Is there something that is, quote, too soon? Or so are there things that should be off limits? Well, we've gone through 6 ideas today. We've looked at 6 different pieces, and we've thought about some of the themes and kind of conversations we might have that they raise. And I think they're very much with us, and certainly conversations about statues, particularly statues associated with people who may have been associated with heinous acts, genocide. Those are the ones that I think are most currently at the fore. But certainly this is something that I think keeps these conversations robust and interesting. And no doubt we could think of many others that we would include. I will conclude by saying thank you for joining me today. I'm sorry that we're not in person, and I hope you maybe will even share this video with a friend. Comments, thoughts, or ideas, say hi, maxgrinnell@gmail.com, or even reach out via Twitter at the urbanologist if you have any questions or comments, or just like to be in touch. So thank you so much, and I hope you all and I thank you for coming to my talk.